Thank you for joining us today. My name is Victor, and I'm a librarian with the Youth Services Department here at Sacramento Public Library. We are excited to welcome you to the STEAM Youth Leadership Program Series. This program is funded by the California State Library's Stronger Together initiative.
We are engaging in conversation with Andrés Meléndez. Andrés is a National Science Foundation postdoctoral research fellow and a lecturer in the Department of Mathematics at University of California, Berkeley. Andrés' passion for teaching has given them the opportunity to teach mathematics at San Francisco State University, at their current assignment at the University of California, Berkeley, and starting this winter at Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California. They have also been invited to participate as invited speaker in numerous seminars and symposiums in colleges and universities throughout the United States and abroad, going to places such as Germany, Costa Rica, India, Canada, Colombia, Japan, and later this year, Chile, sharing with people all over the world their knowledge and passion in different math-related areas of expertise. Andres has also co-authored and contributed to many research and expository articles, writings, as well as writing contributions to blogs in their interests: algebraic, enumerative, and geometric combinatorics, scholarship of teaching and learning, and quantitative justice. They have a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics from the University of California, Berkeley, with minors on philosophy and Chicanx and Latinx studies, a Master of Arts in Mathematics from San Francisco State University, a PhD in Mathematics from the University of Kentucky, and a graduate certificate also from the University of Kentucky, with a specialization in Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies.
Andres, thank you for joining us today. I would like to introduce you to our cohort members, Edgar, Estop, Jeha, and Jeha, who are ready to start a conversation with you about your personal journey as a Black, Indigenous, and Latinx STEM professional. Go ahead.
I'm Edgar Tellez. I'm a junior in high school right now. Okay. So my first question is, it seems like you've taught at many different colleges and a lot of different schools, and right now you're at University of California, Berkeley. So I was just wondering, what influenced you to join the team at UC Berkeley?
That's a great question. Well, I did my undergraduate at UC Berkeley, so in a sense, it's like coming to, back to somewhere familiar. And I also love the Bay Area. In earlier discussions, we were talking about how California is a very unique and special place to a lot of us. And I think that when I moved to the Bay Area, I was 17 when I started undergrad. And so I became an adult and went through 7 years of my adulthood in the Bay Area. So coming back has definitely been a nice experience. And so I said, okay, maybe it's time for me to give back to the same place that prepared me as a mathematician to start off.
Hi, Andrés. My name is Etzel, and I'm also a junior in high school. Was there anything else that you'd like to, any information or anything you'd like to let the viewers know about yourself?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Southern California. So I grew up in a city called Linwood in Southeast LA, the city right next to Compton. And my parents came from Costa Rica to the United States. And while they didn't finish their formal education or they didn't pursue any higher education, it's very common and it's inculcated in the way of being in Costa Rica to continue education. And so my parents knew that education was a path for me to grow as a person and also to help me develop professionally. So they encouraged me and supported all my education. So I moved to the Bay Area to study at UC Berkeley. And there I was deciding on what to study, but I had a very supportive high school math teachers and middle school math teachers, all of who were Black and Latinx. And so I had an idea of, in my head of what a mathematician should look like. It should look like my math teachers. Of course, that was a culture shock when I got to UC Berkeley. And it was very different. There were not so many Latinos. There were not so many Black mathematicians, and so it was a struggle to find community in the beginning. But then, as I've learned, sometimes we have to create our own community, and so that's what I've been trying to do with mathematics: is to create community and be as inclusive as possible with as many people who have interests in working with me and working in mathematics.
That was very inspiring. So I was wondering what like initially sparked your interest in mathematics and led you to pursue a PhD in the field.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I honestly can say that if I would have, I mean, I really got into mathematics because I had very supportive high school and middle school teachers. I saw them give me time and support and just gave all their effort to help me succeed. And I say that if I would have been shown that same support from any other, teachers or professors in any other fields, I could have been something else. I could have been a writer or a medical doctor or a, engineer. But my math teachers were the ones who kind of took me under their wing. And so that kind of sparked my interest. And I was like, oh, they actually think I can succeed in this. Let me kind of continue down this path. And I didn't know that I wanted to do a PhD. And to be completely honest, I didn't know PhDs were a thing. I wanted to continue, because I had that, that nice connections with my teachers. I wanted to be a high school math teacher. But when I got to my undergrad, I learned that people were getting paid to do math. And I was like, oh, that seems really interesting. And both of my parents have worked for most of their lives in very labor intensive jobs. And not to say that as a mathematician we don't have our stresses, but it's the work that goes into being a mathematician or the physical labor that goes into being a mathematician is a lot different. And so I saw that this was a path where I can both follow my passions and also support my family. And so I was like, okay, maybe this math thing could be a real career. And I learned that I started figuring out, what do I need to do to get to that level? How do I get to the level of a university professor? And one path is to get a PhD in math. And so that led me to follow all the things that I thought I needed to do to get to obtain this position that I'm currently in and the position that I'm going to be moving into in the next few months.
That's really cool. So I was thinking like getting a PhD, that requires a lot of math classes and everything. I was wondering if you could tell us what was the hardest math class you've ever taken?
I think the hardest math class that I've ever taken, well, I can say two. And I know your question was, what's the hardest? But I'll tell you the two hardest that I took. The first one was multivariable calculus. And then the second one, I would say topology. So maybe you're all a little bit familiar with calculus or have heard the word calculus. And so multivariable means we're, introducing several variables to the business of calculus. And topology is the study of shapes and surfaces. So it's thinking about geometry. And I think that these were the two most difficult classes for me because I had a very difficult time or a challenging time visualizing. So oftentimes, in school, my experience was like, how do I compute this the fastest? How do I follow the steps to get this? And so it was very formulaic. And so when it came to me visualizing, that was using a skill that I hadn't trained, which was maybe the artistic side of a mathematician. And so sometimes we forget that this work is interdisciplinary. So part of doing math, I like to say, it's like I get paid to do math, but really I get paid to draw pictures. And so it took me a long time to develop the skills to understand, how do I communicate this through images? What kind of pictures am I drawing to illustrate my mathematics? And then because multivariable calculus and topology are so interconnected with geometry and visualization, I struggled a bit at the beginning.
So mathematics is fairly it's perceived as tough and challenging to most. How do you approach teaching in a way that engages and motivates students?
I love that question. I think that for me, I don't know if you've all heard this phrase that, we teach humans or we teach students mathematics. We're not teaching mathematics. And so I really do like to meet my students in a, with this lens of these are human beings that are coming to my classroom with all that goes on in their lives. And so that can mean they're all succeeding and doing great in classes. That could mean anything from, oh, maybe they're having some challenging problems at work. But when they're in the classroom, my responsibility is like, how can I support them to develop the skills that they need for them to pursue their interests and passions afterwards? So I'm not trying to necessarily encourage everybody to be a mathematician. I want people to be capable math users. And so I try to encourage my students to see how can the skills that we develop in the classroom translate to your desired profession or your chosen field of study. And that's kind of the philosophy that I take initially.
Okay, so it seems like you teach a lot of subjects such as like quantitative justice. What has been your favorite topic to teach so far?
So actually, I haven't had an opportunity to teach a quantitative justice class, but I am working with a lot of people on developing a textbook in quantitative justice. And so this is kind of using the skills, so using math and data science in hopes that it reaches some social justice impact. And so I think the question was, what have I enjoyed teaching? Or what am I going to, yeah. So I've enjoyed teaching combinatorics. And so combinatorics, if you ask different people, they can give you different definitions. But if I had to summarize it, I would say it's the study of the process and the characterization and the thinking that goes into enumerating objects. So counting objects. It's not so much like I'm going to count this set of numbers. It's more, what are the techniques that are used so that I don't have to do an exhaustive list of counting? So it's kind of, how do we think about ingenious ways to simplify our counting? And so I've really enjoyed that. But because you mentioned quantitative justice, I am looking forward to teaching and combining my main areas, which is combinatorics and discrete geometry, with quantitative justice. And so I look forward to teaching a class on the geometry of voting in the next couple of years. And so, yeah, so there is always geometry behind a lot of things. And so we might not think about voting as something mathematical in the first place, but it is. And then if we do accept that it is mathematical, it might be difficult to see where the geometry comes in, but I'm really looking forward to teaching something along those lines.
So I feel like we can agree upon that math's a fairly like broad subject, but how do you think mathematics plays in addressing real world problems? And can you share any examples from your own work?
Yeah, that's also a very nice question. And so, like I mentioned, I try to inspire my students or work with my students to develop their mathematical skills to support whatever they choose to, whatever career or major they choose to follow. But sometimes that's difficult, right? And so it takes a little bit of work. And so oftentimes I felt that my math was a little bit kind of abstract and it wasn't impacting that many people. And so that with that in mind, at least this is something that's very special and important to me, is how do I use my math skills in service of others? And so that led me to this field of quantitative justice. And so, for example, using mathematical tools, statistics, data science, and all these things to analyze a certain community and see what support they need. So maybe this is a little bit of a simplified example, but it is a real example. I was in Providence, Rhode Island at a math institute called the Institute for Computational and Experimental Research Math, so ICERM, that's associated to Brown University. I was like, who lives in Rhode Island? What is there to do in Rhode Island? But I went to Rhode Island and I went to Providence. And one thing that I learned is that they have a very large Latino population and a very diverse demographics. But that wasn't very clear from the neighborhoods that were close to the university. You had to leave a little bit further from the university to see these places. And so what we did was we compiled all the data of all the restaurants in Providence And we also gathered the demographics. So like, where are the majority of Latinos, you know, immigrants, whatever, you know, is taken from census data, where are these people living and what is the income level? And so the university or universities in general tend to buy food, to have employees and their students, and do their catering from local businesses that are near the universities. But sometimes those are very wealthy businesses. And so how do we generate a list of places that the university can start using to support the local community? And so this is where we used our mathematical skills and our data skills and our coding skills to write up a proposal. Look, this is where the data is telling us that these are the neighborhoods with the, let's say, the lowest average income. Maybe that's a sign that we should be supporting businesses in those locations. And what are the businesses that are women-owned or Black-owned or first generation owned or something like this, to kind of help them set roots in their city, so that they don't have to, so that they're supported by institutions like nearby universities. And so that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but we used our math skills to write this proposal, and hopefully things like this can become more common. It's like, how do we use the math in support of a certain community? Yeah,
It's actually really cool how you use your math to support low-ended like businesses. And it seems like you've done a lot of writing in your career so far. And I've seen you edited and helped write a book called Testimonios, Stories of Latinx and Hispanic Mathematicians. This is writing a book and editing one is like a huge accomplishment. What inspired you to start or join on this project?
yeah, that's a great question. So with a group of us, I was part of this organization called Latisms, so Latinx and Hispanics in the mathematical sciences. And so I was on the board of this thing. And we all know what happened in 2020. In 2020, something very bad called the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, impacted our work and a lot of people's work. And so it was both a blessing and a curse, right? There were real challenges that we were facing as humanity, as a whole. But we also realized that our work was impacted in terms of sharing the stories and trying to inspire students and other mathematicians about the work of Latinx mathematicians. And so we took the time, because we were working from home, to start editing this book and recruiting people to contribute to this book. And so we managed to get 28 or 29 mathematicians to share their stories with us. And so these are really impactful, raw stories that you could read, and very inspiring and also very honest. And we had a lot of people that say, no, I can't contribute because I don't want to relive some of the stories that should be set, like that they would like to share in terms of somebody resonating with them. But different life circumstances just didn't allow them to sit down and take the time to reflect on their experiences. And so and we were grateful for their honesty, but we managed to get about 28 mathematicians to share their stories. And the inspiration really comes from trying to share with the broader public the work of people who don't have the spotlight all the time. And so for us, that means, at least at that time, meant let's spotlight the work of some really amazing Latinx mathematicians.
So
Hopefully I'm
was the
answering your
most
question.
surprising? Oh yeah, that definitely answered my question. Thank you. I was just curious, what was the most surprising thing you learned when writing this book or helping write this?
I can honestly say that I a lot of the people who contributed to the book, a lot of the people who shared their stories are friends of mine, but sometimes we don't know everything somebody goes through. And these are people that I collaborate with, that I used to see very often, and then I'm reading their chapters as I'm editing, and I'm just like, whoa, that's a really impactful story. And so it was nice to get to know people in a deeper level by reading what they had to say. But it was a challenge, because sometimes I had to like take a break, and some of the stories really impacted me because I could see myself being reflected in what they were writing and what they were experiencing. So I had to take some time off where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just put this down tonight and I'll pick it up tomorrow, the day after, because it was the stories are so real. And so I really do encourage you all to take a read, and you're free to contact me, or of course you all are associated to the library, so please make use of the library. And if the library doesn't have the book, it would be I would be happy to provide.
Okay, so whether it be through like quantitative justice or data science, how do you handle setbacks or challenges in your research?
That's a great question. So one thing that you all, since you all did such an amazing job writing about or taking notes on stuff that I've done, one thing that you might have noticed is that I've never written, aside from my, compiling my thesis together, I've never written an article by myself. And my hope is that I will never have to. Of course, people have different perspectives on this, and we can have a whole discussion on that. But math is difficult, but I enjoy it. And so when I get to work with others, I kind of get re-energized. And so when I'm stuck, when I'm having troubles coming up with ideas, or there's a computation that just isn't working, it is so nice to have somebody to rely on and say, hey, can I just run this idea by you? Can we talk this through? Can we write this paper together? Because writing is intimately connected to mathematics, and it is very difficult, as you all probably know, right? When you have to write these long papers. So having other people to support you through this process is how I would probably get through most of my setbacks.
So having setbacks is pretty hard just in any career. Have these setbacks ever made you consider or just think that you don't like math at all?
I have always liked math, and but I've never been like in love with math to the thing like my life will fall apart if I don't do it anymore. So there are days where I'm just thinking, it's like, okay, this happened to me, or this person said something about my work, or this person said that I couldn't be a mathematician, which I've been told a lot. But I have a PhD, and I can tell them, no, you can't, you can't take that away from me anymore. I am a mathematician. But when I was a student, I was told you wouldn't be a mathematician several times, and I think I've written about this in some areas. But yeah, so I think that yeah, it's challenging, but yeah. So can you remind me of the last part of the question, so that I don't rant forever?
So is this have these setbacks ever caused you to dislike math in any way?
That's right. So I don't think I ever ended up disliking math. And I used to think, okay, I do dislike math, but when I take the time to really reflect and process, it was like, oh no, I disliked what people told me about my math, or what people were telling me, or for example, that I wouldn't be a mathematician. Not so much that I dislike the math, but that hurts just as much as if one day you lose your passion, right? And so I don't think I've lost my passion for mathematics, but I have struggled in finding a place in the mathematical community because of these instances where I'm told that I wouldn't be a mathematician.
So I feel like mathematics is as I was saying, it's fairly broad, and the general public doesn't enjoy learning it. But is there any misconceptions that people say or think about mathematics and that you don't agree with, and how do you approach rewriting the narrative and debunking them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so, people say that math is everywhere, and to an extent, I do believe it, but sometimes it's hard to see. But I work in geometry, and I've learned that even if you are in chemistry, for example, there's math behind it. There's some geometry. So I try to at least illustrate my math to people, saying look, this is how one might experience mathematics in the real world. One thing that I wouldn't say I debunk, but what I try to challenge people to think about is that math is a universal language, and that math has only one right answer. And that is not the case, because if there was only one right answer, or one way of presenting an answer, then I would be out of a job. Because part of this is finding out the best way to share an answer to a mathematical problem. And then you all have probably studied the Pythagorean theorem at some point in your math journey. There are over 200 proofs of the Pythagorean theorem. So while there is one answer, which says, if we take two sides, let's say A and B, and you take the hypotenuse to be C, so A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I mean, that's a finite answer. It's nice and presentable. But to say that there's only one right answer would be wrong, because there's so many ways to present a solution to that. And we see that evidenced by the 200 different ways of proving the Pythagorean theorem. Another thing is debunking or thinking about where the mathematics comes from. So I keep on saying the Pythagorean theorem, but Pythagoras wasn't necessarily the first one to discover this. And so thinking about who gets the spotlight and who gets to claim certain mathematical results. And so, indigenous people, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Egyptians, Greeks, everybody thinks of like, oh, well, this dates back to the Greeks. Well, the Greeks existed and they did embracing mathematics, but in the other side of the world, there were other people also doing mathematics. And so there's this kind of idea of like, let's really think about whose solution or whose mathematics is actually being shared. And so that's something that I try to push back on. So not necessarily debunk, but think about who we're giving credit to. And are they the only people that we should be giving credit to? I don't know if that's kind of making sense, but that's what I'm thinking.
All right, since we're kind of like talking about like history and who gets spotlight, are there any like famous mathematicians or just like any mathematician that really resonates with you?
That's a very thoughtful question, and it's a hard question for me. It's hard because I try not to put people on pedestals, because they say when you meet your heroes, you're gonna be let down. But because everybody's human, right? But there are people whose work I do admire in different contexts. And so, for example, one mathematician or two mathematicians, I can say, are like Richard Tapia, who's a professor at Rice University. And Richard Tapia is a Chicano mathematician, and he's devoted a lot of his mathematical career to expanding the opportunities for minorities in mathematics. And Richard Tapia receives a national medal of science, I believe, from Barack Obama several years ago. And so this is like inspiring. It's like, okay, mathematicians are getting the spotlight in the bigger political global news. And it's more inspiring to see that it is a person who comes from communities that are similar to mine. In fact, he grew up here in LA, so it's where I grew up. He grew up in LA. And then another mathematician is David Blackwell. David Blackwell was a Black mathematician, and I believe he was the first tenured Black professor at UC Berkeley. And he has a very interesting story, and I wouldn't say it's inspiring or anything, but it really highlights the realities of the time periods people were living through. And so he wasn't hired in the math department, and so he was hired in the statistics department. And so there's a lot of things. And so I encourage you all to read Richard Tapia's or David Blackwell's stories. But these two individuals are mathematicians who opened the door for people from my communities and communities that you all might share with to do mathematics in this country. And so I really admire both of their work. But I could give you, everybody in the book that's highlighted in the Testimonios book is somebody that I admire, that I consider friends. And so I would also recommend. There are two websites, or several websites, but two that I'll highlight is Latisms.org, which highlights every year during Hispanic Heritage Month a different mathematician every day. And then Mathematically Gifted and Black also does that during Black History Month. Actually, and I'll mention there's a more recent website that's doing amazing work called Indigenous Mathematicians. And they also highlight the work of Indigenous mathematicians in this country. And so there's a lot of different places where we could try to build community and find community and spotlight the work of mathematicians who don't typically have that spotlight.
Okay, sorry. How do you stay updated with the mathematic advancements and trends in the field of mathematics?
That's
I was
a nice
gonna say,
question.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I had a follow-up question, but I mean, I want you to answer it first.
Okay. So one thing that I didn't know that I would have the privilege of doing, and I do acknowledge it as a privilege because not everybody can travel so easily as I've been able to. But one pleasant surprise that I didn't know about was being able to travel to other countries or other states. And so how do I keep up to date is by going to conferences, seeing what are the novel results, who can I potentially collaborate with. And so this is going to conferences, and it has taken me to, as some of you all have mentioned, to other countries like Japan and Germany. And so that's one way to keep up to date, by listening and reading other people's articles. Fortunately, now with the internet, we have easier access to people's writing, and we can always send emails. And so even people that I don't know, whose work I still admire and I'm interested in, is just kind of saying like, hey, I've been thinking about this, or I read your paper, I had some questions. And sometimes you get responses, which is awesome. Sometimes you get ghosted, but people are busy, so you shouldn't take it personally. But yeah, having that communication, taking advantage of the progress, or the developments in technology. So being able to have Zoom meetings like we're doing with other people in other countries and my collaborators. And so I've collaborated with people in different continents. And so these are ways that I keep up to date, and also sharing my own math, right? Sometimes I get invited to give talks, but sometimes it's a matter of shooting somebody a message and sending somebody a message and be like, hey, I'll be in town. Do you have time to talk? And sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I have time to talk. And would you like to give a seminar talk at our university? And then it's just like, oh, I wasn't planning to self-invite myself, but I'll gladly accept it, and so yeah, so building that community and keeping in touch and reading. I really do think that we really do stay up to date if we continue reading what people are writing. So seeing what people are kind of citing my work, and then what are the other people that are work close to me are citing, and having those papers kind of, I have a stack of papers. Well, I used to have a stack. Now, fortunately, I can just drag and drop onto my computer. And so I have like this folder with a whole bunch of PDFs that says to read. I have not read a lot, like I don't know, like a third of them, but there's like 100-something papers. It's just it's so rapidly growing, but that's also a nice thing, right? That means that math doesn't get to run out.
And yeah, this question is more for those who are similar to you, like trying to go into the mathematics field. What advice do you give to aspiring mathematicians, especially those who are trying to pursue advanced degrees?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say to first find your community, because we talked about the support systems and like having that support to succeed. And so find a community. They don't all have to be mathematicians. It would be great if you include mathematicians, but find a supportive community, and then find people in that community that can serve as your mentors. And so mentorship is very, very important. And so, but this is where I kind of, try to push back on traditional ways of thinking about mentorship. There's mentorship, lateral mentorship, like saying you have peers, right? So you all can be each other's mentors. And then we have some different power dynamics where you have like your advisors and stuff like that. But you get to choose who your mentors are. So from my experience, some people will be like, for example, to my PhD advisors, like, oh, Andrés is a very good student, or Andrés is a really good mathematician. And like, you've really done a really good job, mentoring him. And then I'm like, yeah, that's true. I have received mentorship, but let's not forget that I had the autonomy to choose my PhD advisor, and it was a mutual agreement, right? And so seeing things like, yeah, so having that power to say, kind of, and it sounds almost selfish, but it's not, or like cocky here, but it's not. It's just like, you get to be part of my community. I'm allowing you to have the privilege, because you all are amazing, right? So you all can say, like, you have the privilege of working with me just as much as I have the privilege of working with you, right? So forget kind of breaking down that, like, that vertical power structure and saying, like, yes, I'm going to learn from you, but I'm sure I have something that you can learn from also. And you have the power to say, sorry, you're not meeting my expectations also. So again, you have the power to choose who's in your community and who can serve as a mentor.
All right, so you've taught in a lot of different places, a lot of different schools. What has been your favorite place to teach so far?
I think I've enjoyed teaching actually everywhere that I have taught. And I don't think I have a favorite, but I do have favorite things that I've learned from each of the places. And so for right now, I'll say that one of my pleasures has been doing undergraduate research. So doing research with undergraduate students. And at UC Berkeley, that's the first place I really had the opportunity to grow as a research mentor and a research advisor. And so I would say that that's my favorite thing from Berkeley, is like really coming into terms with my mentorship abilities and incorporating undergrads to my research. At San Francisco State, I really enjoyed teaching introductory classes, and it was to people who were not necessarily going to be mathematicians. And so I got a diverse group of majors and people from different backgrounds. And so I really liked that diverse aspect that I got from teaching those introductory courses at San Francisco State. I didn't do so much teaching at Kentucky, but I did do some work there, and I really enjoyed seeing the approaches that people took to doing math in different places. And so also the experiences that people do. So the University of Kentucky is a flagship institution, meaning most students come from, part of being a flagship institution is that they will come from nearby areas. And so I've worked with students all throughout California, but I had never really worked with students from other places. And so learning that there was more to diversity in Kentucky than just, racial or ethnic diversity. There were other things there were other communities that were underserved in different ways. And so the Appalachian Mountains, or the Appalachian region, for example, is a very rural region. And so having access to mathematics in places like that is something that I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't left to teach at or study in a different state.
So is there any as of right now, do you have any specific like projects or any like research that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I always have, I would say, probably too many projects that I'm balancing. And so one of my projects, I'll mention two projects. One of them on the more quantitative justice side is called the MetaMath project, which is how do we use mathematics and mathematical tools to study the mathematical community. And so that can be like doing studies on who is actually having access to resources in the university or in the K-12 setting and things like this. And then on the combinatorial side, or the geometric side, I have some projects on things called polytopes. Polytopes, you all probably know about them, but maybe have not heard the word polytope. So polytopes are higher generalizations of polygons to higher dimensions. And so we think about in 2 dimensions a square, in 3 dimensions a cube. Well, a computer, for example, can understand what happens in higher dimensions. And so trying to figure out patterns about certain polytopes is kind of like the branch or the thread of my research projects in the combinatorial side.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to move on to our Q&A segment.
Thank you all for the great questions.
Thank you, Andrés. So now we're opening the room for anybody. Here are the rest of our cohort that would like to ask Andrés a question. So now we have a few minutes left per, so you can have a chance to talk to Andrés.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What specific branch of math do you enjoy teaching the most, and why?
So that's a hard question because I really enjoy teaching combinatorics because that's my research area. And so I can kind of recruit people to be like, hey, you should come work with me and maybe we can do some research projects. But I really enjoy teaching introductory courses. So like calculus, those are the classes that most people will try to avoid. And maybe, of course, if I taught calculus every year for the next 5 years, I would get annoyed of it. But I like teaching that pre-calculus, calculus, multivariable calculus, because I get to meet more students that are not necessarily going to be math majors. And so once I'm teaching these upper division math courses, then I'm only stuck teaching math majors. And so my potential community just becomes more restricted, right? And so if I teach these introductory courses, I get to see more students and get to know more about what students are up to. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Anybody else has an additional question that they would like to ask Andres at this time? Go ahead, Christian.
You're on mute, Christian.
Hello? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So I was wanting to ask, what is it that you find most interesting about teaching math or just teaching in general?
That's a hard question, but I think my students, and I actually, it's very coincidental that you asked this question. I promise you, Christian did not tell me this question, that he was going to ask this question before. But I received an email recently, I think 2 days ago, saying like, oh, Prof. Andres, we can see your excitement on this lecture. We really enjoyed this particular lecture because we can see how much you really enjoyed that topic. And so I think that's something that I enjoy about teaching, is sharing that excitement about the topics that I enjoy, right? Again, I don't expect my students to love everything that I teach or even use everything that I teach, but hopefully they'll see that I've devoted enough time to preparing and to developing as a mathematician to convey that excitement and say like, this is really cool math. And maybe you can say, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And then try to share it with somebody else. And so conveying that excitement about certain mathematical topics. I think because of my teaching and through my teaching, it's not necessarily that this is something I get by teaching, but through teaching, I meet students who ask me, for example, for letters of recommendation. And I love to write students letters of recommendations because it brings me so much joy to see them accomplish their goals. And a lot of them recently have been like, oh, students that have been in my classes that want to go to graduate school and get their PhDs. And so I've had several students accepted this semester to go to PhD programs next year. And so like that brings me so much joy to see like, okay, it kind of also validates like, oh, maybe I am doing something right. I struggle from that, that imposter syndrome. I'm just like, man, I don't want to mess up somebody's mathematical careers, but when they get those acceptances, it's like, okay, no, I am doing something okay. And they are excited to continue their mathematical journey. And I really like, seeing people get excited about things that they might have not made connections to previously. And so seeing, somebody who's not necessarily a math major say, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm interested about this particular thing. Maybe I'll take one more math class. Again, they don't ever have to become a math major, but if they just take one more math class, then that's great. That means that this person is becoming more of a capable, mathematical user.
Thank you for answering that question, Andres. And we definitely want to thank you for having set aside time from your busy schedule to come and join us and provide us with a lot more of what you know. So we're definitely looking forward to hopefully see a few more books out there with your name on it. And you'll be happy to know that we'll be definitely trying to get those books out and add them to our collection. It's important that people know about them. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and thank
you all so much. It's been a great time.
No problem. Have a great afternoon.
All right.